Hello and welcome to Church for People Who Don't Like Church. What do you do when faith has been bruised by disappointment? In this episode, we talk about what happens when church lets you down, prayers feel unanswered, or life doesn't turn out the way you'd hoped. We explore whether faith can survive disappointment, what healing can look like, and whether it's possible to begin again without pretending the hurt didn't happen. I'm Matt Oldham.
And I'm Anthea Ratton. Good to see you, Matt.
Anthea Ratton, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
Well, the sun is shining, pouring through my window here. Light through the trees, the birds are singing. Everything's okay in the world. And I'm with my favourite podcast co-host.
Podcast co-host, exactly.
So I think we should start with something positive this episode. Tell me something you love about church, Anthea.
Okay. I love about church, I love singing. I like singing. I've always enjoyed being a singer. I sang in choirs when I was at school, and ever since, really, I've sung in churches, not in any formal sense, just standing there with everybody else. But I love it, and well, we call it in church, we call it worship, don't we? But I just love all that. I love that opportunity just to really let rip and make a sound. So yeah.
There is something about communal singing, isn't there? We're in the middle of the World Cup, or the start of the World Cup, and when you get lots of people together, there is something communally uplifting about singing.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as some of our listeners will know, and you will know, we're big Arsenal fans in this house, and I particularly love singing at the Emirates Stadium, North London, forever. And when the whole 55,000 people are singing that together, that's quite a moment. There's something about coming together with others and making a sound and being on the same whatever it is, focus that in church is God mostly, and in obviously elsewhere things like football. But yeah,
the only problem I have with singing, Anthea, is that I'm really bad, and this has been validated over many years, mainly by my children. If we were singing in the car, they would always tell me to shut up. So I have a really solid 5-note range. Anything above or below that, I'm going to struggle with. So I think I have my limitations. But in that 5-note range, I'm really strong.
You're really strong. So what do you love about church then? What?
Well, I do love worship, and I think I'll just echo your theme. There is something unusual about it, and I think it's probably the thing that if people came through the door and saw people just singing, or where we are at church, we see some people going to football or with their kids, they play hockey or football behind, and you see us singing. They're really curious about it, and I think it's. I think once you get over that sort of self-consciousness, which I'm not brilliant at doing, and there are moments in worship which are fantastic. So I'm not saying I'm a huge worship fan. I'm often a little bit around the edges of it, mainly because I struggle to sing. But I think when it goes off and it's sometimes you can just have those special moments in worship that are difficult to describe. Really, really cool. So I do like worship. So I'm gonna give you singing. We'll allow.
Okay, thank you.
That's fine. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get on with the disappointment. So tough subject this week, but I think it's one that absolutely we need to sort of address, because I mean, you've been in leadership for a long time, so this is something you must have, people come to you with this periodically. So when you hear the phrase, disappointment, faith after disappointment and disappointment in faith, what kind of disappointments do you think people are carrying?
Gosh, it's such a big word, disappointment, and I've been sort of thinking about it quite a lot. It's quite nuanced, a nuanced emotion, and I just wanted to tell you a funny story, which makes sense, because I was finding it hard to think about it. I was on my dog walk, and I was trying to think about, what do we mean by disappointment? What is disappointment? What how is it linked to faith? And as often, and I'm sharing this because I think this might be helpful if you're a listener who gets distracted, but I became completely distracted with another thought, which completely consumed me. And the other thought was, what do blind people do when they've got their guide dog when they need to pick up the dog poo? And I was thinking, what happens? Do they just not pick it up? Do they? I was completely interested in this thought to the point when I got home, I looked it up, I googled it, and apparently it is sorted. Um, Guide dogs have a command. They're trained so well that they usually have a command when to do their business, so that the owner can be more in control of it, and then they can. And then apparently they know where the dog is, and they feel down the back of the dog so they can know where the poo is landing, and then anyway, we know how we pick up dog poo. But it was I was completely distracted by that.
That is a tangent I didn't expect us to be going along, to be honest.
But our brains pop off, and I think particularly when it's a difficult subject to think about, it's much easier to get drawn into something completely less relevant. So I did look up a dictionary disappointment definition of disappointment. So I'll read that out to you. It's unhappiness or discouragement that results when your hopes or expectations have not been satisfied, or someone or something that is not as good as you had hoped or expected. So, and it says it's a complex emotional response that occurs when reality falls short of expectations, which is interesting. And it's a blend of sadness, frustration, unmet desires. And it's a gap, a sort of cognitive gap between what you've been hoping for and what happened. And I thought that's interesting, because any cognitive gap will cause what psychologists call dissonance, which what we could just call is uncomfortable feelings. And it says that disappointment is normally a sign that you care really deeply about something, and it's then the intensity of the feeling. Then the gap will be huge depending on what you're disappointed about. So
it's very heavy, and it's like, I think that's why it is the ultimate parental sanction, isn't it? I'm not angry with you, I'm disappointed. And it's
very disappointed.
That's even heavier than anger. And I know we're sort of trivializing that a little bit, but disappointment in church or people in relating to that, is obviously going to be really painful. I think because of the vulnerability around faith. So any of those, I guess disappointment in relating to faith is probably going to cut deeper than disappointment because you've not tidied your room.
Yes, I think so. I think when the minute we've got God involved and a bunch of other people, which often there is in faith, then it will cut deeper. Although I think there are disappointments in life that people of faith and no faith face that are painful anyway. But yeah, do you think that? Do you think it's more disappointing when faith's involved?
I do. I think because, and again, I've spoken to people close to me who've been involved in church splits, for example, and it's so deeply personal because people put so much into their community, their church, their faith, that if that is split or compromised in some ways, it's so deeply personal, and there's feelings of betrayal, I would imagine, feeling, very, very complicated emotions, and often probably difficult to deal with because of the personal nature of those, or even familial relations of those. So, and there could be smaller disappointments that build up over time when you sort of become a bit disillusioned or disappointed with like a culture or certain leaders, or but then there could be some disappointment because you've been hoping, praying for something and it doesn't happen, and it's just like that's just sort of a gradual wearing out. So I think there's a real sort of broad spectrum of what that disappointment could look and feel like. And I think all of them are deeply personal, and will have different resonances for different people. So I do think that there's, and I think probably the word I would say is vulnerability. There's a vulnerability that comes with faith, and if that is disappointed, or if that is taken away or challenged in any ways, the reaction is going to be deeply personal as well.
I think so, and I think you've put that well. I think you described some of it is is sort of acute, almost traumatic things that happen that cause disappointment, like a church split, or I would say perhaps a sudden death, or things like that. Or you've also described this sort of low grade grinding down, disappointing that can go on perhaps for many months and years. Perhaps not particularly acknowledged, but it's there, and it will be having an impact on faith and relationship with God and others.
Yeah, and that might just be like, life just not turning out what you'd hoped for.
Absolutely.
You'd followed this path, you'd prayed these prayers, and just life isn't getting better for you, and that's a grinding disappointment. And I think there's also this like a difference between like a personal disappointment. So I feel let down by that person, or I feel let down by God, or I've let myself down in relation to faith. That's like almost a personal. And then there's a collective disappointment of I've been let down by them, or this group, or this church, or these leaders.
Definitely. Yeah.
So so I think I think we're both agreeing that there's deep personal pain that can be created from disappointment, and then a range of areas that disappointment can stem from. And I think some of it also might involve like almost a sense of guilt if it leads to sort of splitting up of groups or something other, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think some people can feel guilt at feeling disappointed, perhaps feeling like they shouldn't feel like that, particularly in a church setting. I should be full of faith and hope and trust, and why am I feeling not like that at all? I'm feeling these other things. Must be something wrong with me, and therefore I'm not good enough, therefore I am the problem, therefore I feel guilty about that because I can't shake the feeling. Or you feel guilty because you were feeling disappointed with the church that you've loved for years, or the people, a person, a leader perhaps that you deeply respect but has disappointed you in some way, and you feel guilty.
So then, in your experience, what happens to a person when a church, leaders, or prayer, or a community lets you down? What's the reactions that people have?
I think, as we've said earlier, it's individual, it's nuanced. I think it can be a very big reaction. It can cause people to leave. I think people can say, right, that's it. I'm leaving. I'm going somewhere else, or I'm leaving faith, or I'm taking time out. It can cause people to sort of really step away from what's caused them the pain. It can cause people just to sort of to lose trust, and therefore, and I'm trying not to sound pejorative here because it isn't. These are real feelings, and it's okay if you've lost trust, you've lost trust. But if you've been let down by something or someone, it can make you feel wary, and so you maybe will be less engaged than you were, or appear to be less bothered. But it's not that. It's because you've become less engaged because you've got hurt. So it's subtle. So it may be that you come across as somebody who sits on the edge, or maybe you just don't go along as much as you used to because it's become difficult. All sorts of different reactions, really.
It's almost like in COVID when people talked about quiet quitting their jobs. You sort of quietly quit, withdraw, you become more peripheral, you sort of almost fade away as opposed to being a dramatic announcement. You just sort of become a bit more numb, less engaged.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess there's maybe the other extreme could be that if there is real hurt, that there is sort of anger and you become anti-church or anti that church. Like a reformed person is like the evangelist for the opposite of it. So how do we then respond to those people? 'Cause it feels like, and we talked about right at the top about sort of looking to try and create healing for that. I guess there needs to be an element of honesty about this, and how do you confront those? And I would imagine that honesty is difficult because of the personal nature of some of these things. I mean, it might feel difficult to blame or not to blame something for failed prayer. So how do we encourage honesty, have honest conversations about these things when they're deeply personal and sometimes can be quite intangible?
I think it is a difficult one. I think as people within a faith community, it's about listening carefully to each other and noticing if you can see disappointment in somebody, you may be able to see it when they can't, and that might be quite helpful to gently call it out, or maybe not call it out. That sounds wrong. To notice it with somebody. I think because of what we just talked about, because people can feel guilty and ashamed of it, it often doesn't get spoken about. So, hey, here we are talking about it. And if you're listening, then, please come and talk about it if you're disappointed about something. It doesn't mean that anything's going to change externally, but internally something might change if you talk about it. Lost the question there. But
yeah, I think this comes down back to this, the personal nature of it, and as much as if church has been something that is so ingrained in your, that people have been going to church every Sunday for, every week for X number of years, and if that is suddenly questioned, or whether you should go to that church, there's also so much deep relationships in it, but so that honesty, it might be quite difficult for people to say, look, I felt this. So creating sort of safe spaces for people to do that, and there might even be elements of grief in it if that disappointment is very strong. But allowing people to grieve for something that they held before that they maybe don't hold now.
Yeah, I think it's really closely linked with loss, disappointment, and that could be about an unanswered prayer, or I don't know, somebody you prayed for who died and you hoped that they would live. I think one that gets really not very well looked at in communities and in churches in particular is that of singleness. We all know people who are single in our church. We don't know what disappointments they carry because they always hoped to meet someone, or perhaps they'd always hoped to have children, but they're now 65 and that moment's gone. Yeah. And it's sort of this living loss that goes on and is exacerbated by all happy families around them. And I think things like that we need to be aware of and acknowledging and noticing around people who've got sort of living loss of things that they wanted and hoped for. And there's no rhyme nor reason why, and God appears not to have heard those prayers. It's terribly hard for people.
So whilst this has felt quite heavy, we want to look at the positives of this in terms of disappointment potentially being a painful part of a process towards, I guess, spiritual growth. Can you, in terms of that sort of surviving and flourishing after disappointment, let's talk about that for a little bit, because I think if you've been confronted or one of the challenges that you've got a disappointment is that you've held a belief and that's changed, or other people's beliefs hasn't evolved in the way that you have, that can actually be difficult, but also can be part of your growth, you going in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely a moment, isn't it, which could go in either way. And like we said at the beginning, if there's this sort of gap between what you hoped for and what was, which is very uncomfortable, it is hard to be there, and eventually you will go one direction or the other. You will resurrect, if you like, to use a Christian word, or you may completely disappear, deconstruct, walk away. I think it absolutely can be a point of growth if it can be acknowledged, and if as churches and communities we can be places, like you've said, safe places or safe people. People say, look, I'm really disappointed. I'm disappointed with God. I'm disappointed that things didn't happen. Because only when you can begin to talk about it can you make some sense of it, and then you can be realistic. I'll give a neutral example. Like I like to. I was on Sunday. I was on a boat trip as part of a wedding party, and it was going off from Henley-on-Thames to up towards Reading, except it didn't, because it was a wonderful boat with a bunch of really lovely people with food and drink, and but the lock was closed just above Henley, so the boat had to turn round and come back through Henley and go under the bridge, go down towards where we live in Marlow, and so it was sort of going up and down the same stretch of river all afternoon. And I was disappointed because I've never been on the boat the other side of Henley, and I was really looking forward to that. I'm like, oh, so I have to reset my expectations, and I have to think, well, is this boat trip all about you? Is this about what your need and what you're going to get from it? I thought, no, it's not. And what is this trip about? It's about being with all these people. A whole load of them are my friends. My friends got married. We're here together celebrating, and actually we're on one of the most beautiful stretches of the River Thames you could imagine. So why are you being disappointed? So what I did then was reset my expectation. So my expectation wasn't quite right, really, which caused the gap. So I reset it. Had a great afternoon. And if I want to go on that other stretch of river, I can do that another time. So there's something really important about examining the disappointment and being really open and honest about it. Am I disappointed with God? Am I disappointed with people? If I'm disappointed with God, what am I disappointed about? And what is my actual expectation of what God can or can't do? And, how accurate is that? And what do people around me think about that? Maybe I never voiced what I actually wanted, and now I've become disappointed about something that nobody knew. So how do I work that one through? Because disappointment can be over, or it can be something that we never quite were in touch with in the first place, but we feel terribly let down. But nobody knows that. And in church, because there can be a tendency to be very nice to each other all the time, we're not brilliant at communicating this sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is it's important to actually call out your disappointment. You were disappointed you didn't go on the boat to Henley, but then you reset, and it's like, well, how do you then sort of reset your expectations and start again? And again, that's like a good link into, well, how do you reset? How can you restart again post disappointment? That you've been disappointed, but you're still open. You feel bruised, you feel cautious, but you're still open and want to get a fresh start. How do you reset in that way in your faith?
And again, this will be when we're talking about faith. Different of us, and those of you listening, will have different ways of doing faith. So it's thinking about what are my practices. Like we just talked about worship at the beginning. I love to sing. What has disappointment caused us to perhaps withdraw from? What's going on? What have I sort of moved away from things that are actually nourishing for me? Can I move back towards them? Can I be honest with God? What kind of a God do I believe in? And God is not going to be disappointed with me because I'm disappointed with God. Well, I believe that. But maybe you believe God will be disappointed with you, or cross with you, or smite you, or furious, and perhaps you may need to talk that through with somebody else. It's definitely not the view of God that we have in our church. If God is love, then God is love. So God is a safe space to go to. But where is your God space? And where can you go? Where's it easiest to go? Or maybe it isn't in a bunch of people in that moment. Maybe it's on a walk. Maybe it's on your own. Maybe it's singing on your own. I don't know. It will be different things for different people.
Yeah.
I would always say move towards God, not, if you can, not away from God.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm not the best theologian in the world, but there is precedent for being shouting about your disappointment in God.
Mm.
Look at David and the song. There's
Mm.
he's shouting out often, and it's not all great stuff. So I think we're not brilliant, are we, as Christians of church, to talk about the things that don't go well. We want to just focus on the positives and the nice things. But I think it's okay to lamentations and shouting things out that don't go well. And if we don't acknowledge the disappointment, we're probably not going to reset and start again.
Absolutely, and it's about creating spaces where that's permissible, where and I think we learned this during COVID, particularly when life was going horribly wrong, and still is with all the different complex situations across the world, that we do try and acknowledge and think about and just notice and call out to God, why, and I think the more we can do that, the more we can create lament, the more we can acknowledge sadness and disappointment, the more it becomes more possible to move, I won't say beyond that, but to continue moving with it is perhaps a better way of thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, there's some obvious answers here in terms of, and again, some of the thoughts that I've been having as we've been talking about in terms of giving space for disappointment in church. But what should we, as our church and churches in general, what should we be doing for people who have been disappointed, wounded, or who are slowly rebuilding? What deliberate actions can we take to support those?
I think as leaders, it is our responsibility to set the space so that it's safe and be careful around that. So that, for example, this Sunday in our church, we're having a sharing meeting, which means that there's no formal speaker. It means people can come along and just tell stories. So we're storytelling together. Now, it's very easy to swerve into good news stories the whole time. Like the news feed on your social media. Hey, look at me, I'm having a wonderful time. We don't tend to post the stuff that's really, really, really rubbish, do we? We just we don't. And that can happen on a Sunday morning. It's people just say, oh, this brilliant thing happened and that brilliant thing happening. And I'm very careful to say, let's just share some stories. And if it's not so good, that's fine. We need to hear that too. To tell you a story of unanswered prayer, or a prayer that you still pray, but you're not sure if it will ever be answered. Tell your story of how disappointed you were when the thing happened. Tell your story of sadness or confusion or frustration or anger, and to tell your story of gratitude and gratefulness, because at the same time, we don't want to become completely cynical and unable to feel anything good, because usually in life there are beautiful things happening as well. So setting the space well as a community is important, and that's at all levels of community. So churches typically have smaller groups and people who perhaps meet in ones and twos to talk and walk and pray, and it's being a good friend and listening well to each other, being curious, being not going into fix-it mode. Oh, well, you could do this, you could do that. That's never going to help somebody who's trying to wrestle with something. But equally, it might be what's one small thing I can be grateful for today, and there will always be something.
Yeah, I think so. That's great, and I think we should also just encourage people individually or in their small groups just to call out their disappointments rather than always call out their great successes. So just to sort of wrap this up, because I think that's enough disappointment for one. For someone listening who feels disappointment, what would you want to say to them?
I would want to say, are you disappointed with our conversation about disappointment? If you are, let us know. And we're always really interested to hear. It's exciting that so many people are listening to this podcast, and if you've got comments, put them in the comments or email us or find a way of messaging us. We can always pick up on things if we haven't gone where you wanted us to go. But I would say, for a start, notice its disappointment. this is sort of therapist me talking a bit now, but notice it, because sometimes feelings, we're not so good at knowing what they are. So, oh, actually this is disappointment. Sit with it for a while. If you can sit with God with it, do that. If you can't, that's fine too. Maybe at some point you can get back to sitting with God. When was this disappointment? Is it current? Is it a long ago issue? And what were your expectations? Were they valid and accurate? Or was there a mismatch? And be honest with yourself there, because maybe they were very valid and it's very painful. But maybe there was a mismatch and there was a miscommunication. And if it's a loss, can you acknowledge and that, can you grieve that loss? Have you grieved it? And loss doesn't have to be of a person. It can be of all sorts of things. And if it's a living loss, how can we support you? How can we love you well? How can we make space for you just as you are? And that it may change for you, it may not. But how can we help? So those were my thoughts on that, really.
No, I think that's really, really wise words. And as ever, Anthea, it's never a disappointment talking to you. So thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for listening and supporting us. And we'll see you again soon with another great topic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt.
Go.
Kind, loving, caring.
Loving, kindness, fun.